If you're thinking of making a career change, you're in the right place. I'm Yesim Nicholson, and Your Big Career Move is your opportunity to listen to stories from ordinary people who've made extraordinary career changes. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and if you feel inspired to make your own career change, but you're not quite sure where to start, why not buy my book, Ready to Quit Your Job, or join my next career coaching program, both of which you can find at yescareercoaching.com. Today I'm here with Hector Stanley, and I know he's got a really fascinating story to tell, and I don't know it in very much detail, so I'm really excited to just grill you today, basically, and find out how you made your big career move and the journey that you're on, because it's still very early days in the new career. So I'm excited to find out more. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
So shall we talk about what you were doing before what you're doing today?
Yes, so I had quite a varied career path even before I made the jump to becoming a founder. So I started my career in the construction space as a civil engineer, working on structures, working on the Elizabeth line, among a number of other things. Then moved into kind of consulting, ended up in actually running financial crime investigations, mostly by chance. So that was fun. And then took the leap into tech, worked for a number of progressively smaller tech companies before last year deciding to finally take the plunge, something I've been thinking about doing for a really long time, and founding my own tech company. So yeah, so that's where I am today.
Well, I mean, you make it sound very easy, and I'm sure it wasn't. Can we talk about what the common thread was in the sort of the smaller career changes you made along the way?
Yeah, I think the common thread was probably enjoying working with people and being the person that pulled the team together, whether that was as a project manager or doing on-site coordination, or even now, I mean, I do product for my startup and previously did a sort of product and customer success. So I think the thread is a very sort of people-focused, team-building focused role. Although I only know that now with retrospect. I couldn't claim that there was a plan of keeping that thread throughout, to be honest.
Yeah, it happens sometimes. Sometimes it's a really happy accident, isn't it? That we
Yeah, yeah,
find this thread that keeps reappearing in our different jobs. Was there anything? I mean, this was not one of the questions I was expecting to ask you, but I'm just curious, was there an element of you pulling people together in teams when you were younger, when you were still at school, if you think back?
yeah, a bit actually. I think I sort of naturally fell into the sort of uh, quote unquote team lead role in like group projects at school and at university. Less so necessarily because I was, the best at leadership and more I just sort of kind of sat well in the middle of meetings and made sure that everyone spoke up and added their value. And I was never the most technical person. So that role was sort of off limits to me. I think looking back, sort of that ability to be social and communicate with everyone at different tempos and levels was definitely a thing that came more naturally to me, and that probably sort of inferred my career as a whole. Not that I really realized it at the time, to be honest.
Has there been a bit of self-reflection, or is it something that you've just realized because you're coming on this podcast?
A bit of both. I definitely reflected back quite a lot of decisions when having read your book, to be honest. But I think making the jump into kind of the tech world from consulting, I did have this moment of what do I actually like? Why am I making this leap? It's an industry I don't know anything about. You get all the big stack of sort of not really knowing if you're actually going to do particularly well in that industry. I guess that kind of imposter syndrome thing. And I did reflect back and think, well, what were the bits of my career in construction and in consulting and in FC that I really enjoyed and I felt I was good at, and how could I do that in another space that excited me a bit more? I think prior to that, I'd never really reflected on it. I'd sort of just fallen into the next thing that looked the most exciting, and that had always seemed to work, and not having a plan seemed to work for me.
Are you quite happy to just go with the flow then? Are you somebody that just goes, oh, that looks nice and shiny, I'll go for that now? Or do you
Uh,
deliberate a lot before you make those decisions?
yeah, I mean, I think earlier in my career, I deliberated a lot more. I think leaving engineering probably took me about a year to do. And there were multiple times I would go on a job website and look at the sort of things I wanted to get into and then freak myself out and be like, no, you're an engineer, you know what you know. Like I had to sort of back off from it. I think now, like seeing that things tend to work out, and you can find your niche and find your people in any industry or company. I'm just more confident and easygoing now that lots of these decisions are reversible. Hopping jobs doesn't need to be terrifying, and the amount of data and things that you learn just from doing it is so powerful that always outweighs your risk aversion. But I think earlier in my career, I deliberated a lot longer before making decisions like this, to be honest.
Is it okay if we talk about how old you are?
Yes, I'm 32.
So when you look at your peers, do you see that they are leaning more towards the same attitude that you have, that it's like, well, I'll try it out, and if it works out, great, and if it doesn't, I'll do something else? Or do you see your peers being more conservative?
I'd say, and this isn't true for everyone, but I'd say broadly speaking, a bit more conservative. I think my peers fall into two camps mostly. Either people who have done one thing since they graduated and they still do it, and they've maybe slightly made the decision of, this is me, this is my identity, I'm going to do this forever. Um, and then there's a second camp of people who have switched once. So particularly people from my course, you get a lot of engineers who end up being quite pigeonholed and fall into, you're the guy that designs bridges. And so you spend 10 years doing bridges and then suddenly realize there might be more to life than designing bridges. No offense to anyone who designs bridges. I think lots of those guys have made one switch, and that might be, oh, I want to go work in the software industry as a software engineer, so they'll do a retrain. I I haven't met many people like me from my background who have made 4 or 5 different switches of industry and skill set. That seems very rare, to be honest. It's normally no change or one change, I think, at my age.
So what do they make of you? Are they like, Hector, you're nuts? Or do they think what you're doing is quite cool?
More the former, probably. I think most people I speak to think uh, my career is totally insane, and hopping around every couple of years is the most mad idea. People are like, my friends are really supportive. My friends are great. Like when they heard I was founding a startup, they all rallied together and said, what can we do to help? How can we help you? But there is often the caveat of, we think this is an amazing idea, but I would never do this, because it's insane. But just because the context switching and switching the people you work with, and um, it's so much change and so much risk, and I think people tend to be more risk averse than they need to be. I mostly feel like most of these decisions are quite reversible. Like if you quit a job, most of the time you can go back if you want to, but I don't think people think that way. I think they think you're always progressing into sort of more unknown waters. So yeah, most people think I'm nuts, I think, from my friendship group, which they might not be wrong.
Well, time will tell. What about your
Yeah.
family?
My family, I think my family has gotten used to it. Um, I know my dad, who is a very strong supporter of being an engineer, and we often, when I go home, we'll watch in a very sort of nerdy way. We'll watch like documentaries on construction and things like that, and he's very sort of misty eyed about the world of construction and civil engineering and all this stuff. So I think when I was leaving that, particularly to go into consulting, he wasn't. I don't think he really understood. I think he was like, "Why? Like, this is a great career. Like, it's stable. It works. It's interesting. It's challenging." I think now he understands. I think now, when I come home at Christmas and when I have stories at like family gatherings of the latest thing I built or the latest set of people I've worked with, he gets why that's my path. But early on, I think he was a bit more, what, like, why would you bother? Like, it seems like much more work for not nearly enough gain, I think.
Did you feel like you had to win them over at any point?
Yeah, probably. I think so. I think often you can sort of reflect it back on someone and say, well, what would you rather have done with your career? With a bits like there were bits of my dad's career where he was working for a company that got acquired, so suddenly he was doing a totally fresh job, and I could sort of relate to that and say, well, was that actually a lot more fun than you thought, rather than being really scary? And on reflection, I think he came back to that and said, actually, yeah, that was really good. I really enjoyed it. It might not have been my choice, but it ended up being great. I worked with this like totally fresh set of people, and that was brilliant. So I think over time I've won him over to my slightly unconventional career path. I've had peers call it a portfolio career, which I think is quite it's quite a nice way of putting it, and maybe that's becoming more normal. I don't know.
I think it is. I think the younger generations, I think certainly for sort of my age and above, you did tend to stick to what you know. And I see that with the younger generations that they're perhaps almost taking it to the other extreme where they're like, oh, I'll just do this for 6 months and I'll do that. I was talking to a friend of mine who is in the fashion industry,
Mm.
and she said they have social media managers who literally come and go like buses because they literally stay for 6 months and then they're like, oh, I'm off to travel, or oh, I'm off to work for somebody else. And it does seem quite flighty, especially to us slightly older people. We're like, gosh, 6 months, that's not very long. So I
Yeah,
think things are changing. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves and how it will be in another 10 years' time, whether it will turn again. Be interesting to watch. Um, I know that you went into an incubator program, and it would be really cool if you could tell us about that. I think there might be some listeners that are like, what the hell's an incubator? So perhaps
yeah.
you could explain that to people as well. That would be amazing. And what made you want to go into the program?
Yeah, so yeah, the question "what the hell is an incubator" came up a lot and still comes up a lot. I think I would tell people who I knew, I'd tell my friends, "Oh, I'm starting a company," and they would say, "Brilliant, what does your company do?" And I would say, "I don't know yet." And I'd get a lot of puzzled faces of, "You should really know that before you start one. I think you might be doing this the wrong way around." So before I went to the Antler Incubator, I was working at a really early stage startup. There were 8, 9 of us in the office. We were very much figuring out what we were doing, who we were selling to, building a product from scratch. It was very bare bones, very early days, and I thought it would be really exciting to have that experience, but with my idea, with something I wanted to build. So spent a little bit of time reflecting, came up with a kind of a fresh set of ideas linked to my skill sets, and then applied to Antler. They like you to apply with an idea, even though they're aware that the idea is probably not what you're going to do at the end of it. Um, and an incubator is essentially a sort of a lower risk way of starting a company, is how I kind of wrap it up. So it's 3 months. You're in a co-working space with 80 other sort of aspiring founders, I suppose is the way. And they basically coach you into forming teams, coming up with a business idea together, trying to test that very quickly, and then either binning the idea, changing the idea, maybe changing the team, that kind of thing. So it's sort of 3 months of very intense, constantly changing who you're working with and what you're building. And then every Friday, if you're in a team, you have to pitch. So they make you pitch to their kind of in-house advisory team who pick your pitch apart.
I bet it's
Um,
a bit like The Apprentice, where they literally just tear it to shreds.
yes, it's a strange sort of apprentice Dragon's Den hybrid, where whatever idea you have of any level of, you might believe in it more than anything in the world. They will find holes and they will pick it to pieces, and that's sort of their job. And you get like weirdly used to that, which is a bit strange. You sort of go into, if you don't get picked apart, you sort of think, oh, it's sad now. Like
Something wrong.
maybe they didn't listen. Like I want another go. So it's all very strange. And in the final 2 weeks, they sort of lock in the teams that are still going and still pitching, and they basically give you a kind of a bit of a grading. And if you get above a certain grade, then they'll let you pitch to an external board of investors, essentially. And it's a 10-minute pitch with a 10 to 20 minute grilling. And if you get through that, then they'll invest in your company for 5 to 10% of the business. Um, so then the idea is, you can start a company with, your VC backed already, kind of at day zero, and you can pay your salary and can pay for an office and can do the bare minimum things to kind of start a company. And so yeah, so I met my co-founders in quite early on, and we sort of hit it off and talked about our experiences. And maybe week 2 or 3, we actually decided, okay, like we all really get on. We have very similar ideas. We've got quite different skill sets. So shall we form a team? And we formed a team, came up with this secondment marketplace idea, which is what we're trying to build. And then just, hammered that through to the end of the process and got the funding. So
Awesome.
it's
Before we
it's a
talk
very
about
strange
your
experience.
business, because I really want to hear much more about it because it's really
Oh
fascinating.
yeah.
Before we go there, when you entered the incubator, did you enter with the thought that you might find co-founders, or were you thinking that you would start your own business on your own?
So I hoped I'd find co-founders, really, just because I think all this stuff is easier as a team, not just in terms of the workload, but actually just for sanity reasons. I think starting your own business solo is a really, really brave thing. I was open to the idea that, I might get to the end, pitch an idea solo and get the funding, and maybe there are people in my network and friends who would be willing to kind of take the punt and join me. So that was sort of my backup plan, but I was definitely hoping that I would find a co-founder or two, and that would be part of the process and would make it successful.
Yeah. And you found two really awesome co-founders. And I only know that because I listened to a podcast where you were talking with your co-founders.
Oh,
And
nice.
what a fabulous team you make, because like you said, you all bring different experiences. You've had very different roles in the past. And it seems like you were just like a puzzle that was meant to fit together. Well, that's what it
Oh,
looks
that's
like from
kind.
the outside. You can tell me the reality. I mean, they'll never listen to this. They'll never know. You can say whatever you want.
No, and it is true actually. I mean, I think I want to do something in the sort of people space, but my background really is in HR. Dave, who's one of my co-founders, his background is pretty much all recruitment. Like everything he knows is talent and recruitment really. So he was absolutely crucial because he knows the industry. And then my other co-founder, Susie, she's worked, for big government projects, management consulting, moving teams around, doing, very similar things to what we're trying to do. And she's fantastic, just like holds the team together, is absolutely the glue. If you're ever lucky enough to have Susie on your podcast, you'll be very lucky. She is fantastic. And just like complements our experience really well, I think. I think she just really fits. So the team does seem to work. And it's quite nice being the sort of somewhat technical one, which I wasn't really at my last company, but at Ditto I've been able to sort of build the platform and improve my kind of technical abilities, which is really nice. So yeah, I think it is a team that works really well together, which is good.
Where does the name Ditto come from? Why have you called the business Ditto? So it's
Uh,
Ditto, in case anybody would like to look it up.
yeah. So that's a very good question. So we were actually called something different during Antler. We were called Spring Talent because we thought spring feels sort of positive and it's a nice time of year, and there's also like good connotations with the word spring. But there were lots of other similar talent-based, recruitment-based companies with the name Spring, so we thought that would be too noisy. And so Ditto kind of came about when we were all just sitting around in the pub, and Ditto sort of means like a copy of something else, but maybe something slightly different. And we like the idea of an employee being able to go from one company to another company and sort of being a copy of themselves or being a copy of employee there and just sort of seamlessly fitting in. We went around a lot of names. We probably spent way too long on the names, to be honest. But landed on Ditto, and it was either the beer or just the fatigue of trying to name a company. And we just said, right, brilliant, we're trading under Ditto. That's who we are.
I have to say, I really like the name because it's short, it's snappy, it's very memorable, and like you say, there is meaning behind it. It does.
Yeah.
So people that don't know what Ditto is about, it would be amazing if you can explain it. And the reason that I was, obviously we're talking about your career change journey, but also the reason for having you on the podcast is twofold, because in my very brand new book that was only launched 2 weeks ago, one of the things I do talk about is secondments, because I've experienced secondments in my career. And for me, it was just a brilliant experience because you get to explore whether, working for a different company or in a different part of the business might be of interest to you. But sometimes it can do the opposite. It can actually make you feel a bit more grateful towards the role that you then go back to, and perhaps the colleagues or the company or the culture or whatever it might be. I think it's just a really good opportunity to reassess where you are with your
Mm.
career, which is why it's in the book. I'm a big fan of secondments. So when I saw that Ditto is all about secondments, I was like, this is awesome. I'm preaching to the converted. Tell me
Yeah.
from your point of view, what value Ditto sees in secondments and why you decided to create this business.
Yeah, so I mean, I will say when I got to that bit in your book, and I did know it was coming because I think you'd pre-told me. I did read it with a bit of a grin on my face because I think you absolutely get the value. Back when I was in the construction industry, so comments are sort of slightly more common. I think margins are a bit thinner. You worry less about IP because people build in the same way. But for me, as an employee, when I was rolled off a project and someone said, "Oh, there's actually an opportunity at a different company. We can send you there. We have a good relationship with them. We're looking to develop, XYZ skills in this team anyway, and it'd be great for you to have them. Are you happy to go?" And I got to spend close to a year working on site on one of the biggest infrastructure projects in the country. It was incredible when I was far too junior for the role, but because of the way that the commons worked and they needed a resource, they needed someone to do that particular job. It just supercharged my career. It was just amazing, and it was totally risk free for me. Everything was kind of handled. I was always going to go back to the company I'd come from, so it was an absolute no brainer. And I think I've always been sort of mildly puzzled by how rigid talent is in industries, particularly industries where they're not really competing and they have the sort of same type of person. So with Ditto, what we're trying to build is essentially a secondments marketplace. So if you're a business who maybe you've got too many staff, or you're really looking to develop them, or you just have people who are underutilized, and that obviously comes with its own challenges and risks, you can loan them out to other businesses to get them great development opportunities. It can be in the same sector, different sector, scale up startups, enterprise companies. You can loan them anywhere. Those employees will learn way more than you think in 6 to 12 months, and then they'll come back with a whole new network, a whole new set of additional skills, new software they've learned, etc. It's great for employees because, as we've said, employees are increasingly looking for variety and impact and a bit of a change of scenery. But it's a risk-free thing. They don't have to quit their job and burn any bridges to actually get exposure to that. And on the other side, rather than borrowing, a freelancer or a contractor or an expensive consultancy, you can take someone from a business that you know and that you trust. They're somewhat pre-vetted because the other business wants them back, and that person is essentially your employee, but at a fraction of the cost of what it would be to go down the sort of, FTC or contractor route. And the caveat is there is an expectation that they learn and develop as you would an employee in house. So it's not as clean cut as maybe a freelancer that completes a specific job. But I think most of the time, most of our customers are pretty happy with that. They think that developing staff is part of the gig, and they get a great talented person, and it also develops this extra benefit, which is a connection between the two opposite managers who can talk about development strategies and salary banding and whatever they want to, which we've seen happen quite a few times, which is really nice. So that's what we're building. We've done a handful of secondments so far, and yeah, I mean, touch wood, all seems to be going okay.
I've got so many questions about this. I mean, I've definitely
Yeah.
worked with very progressive businesses that would totally understand the value of this and would be massively on board and understand that there are so many benefits to this. I've also worked for organizations where they would just there would be fear, there would be, oh, that's not how we normally do things.
Yeah.
So what kind of businesses do you feel are most open to receiving seconded staff, but also sending their staff on a secondment?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and there are lots of businesses, particularly bigger businesses, where we're sort of in the procurement phase with them, and that who knows how long that takes. I think there's a big educational piece. There are often lots of hoops to jump through, and that's just how it is. I think for us, sort of the ideal customer for the next year or two will probably look like smaller tech consultancies, digital agencies. They're really flexible with their talent. They're very forward thinking often. And then obviously, and it might just be a factor of the community that we're in, startups and scale ups who tend to have a bit less money. So they have to be smarter with their talent choices. but they're often in the same ecosystem. So we've spoken to scale ups and said, oh, we see that you're hiring for this role, FTC. We actually have this person as a secondee. We have the candidate if you'd like to look at their profile. We'll send the profile over and they'll go, oh, I know that guy and I know the CEO of that company. We'll go, amazing, brilliant. And we'll set up a call, and everyone's in this quite tight-knit community in the UK, but particularly in London in the startup world. So borrowing staff from companies to do specific roles and to give the staff the variety doesn't seem much of a risk to those guys as it does to the sort of larger companies and the bigger players. So that's where we're cutting our teeth for now, and hopefully we'll gain the trust of bigger companies as we go.
Yeah. And maybe that's the way to do it, and I think it was Susie, your co-founder, that mentioned, well, she made the comparison between Airbnb and what you're doing. I can't remember how she described it, but it was really beautiful. I don't know if you can remember, but you'll do a much better job of describing it than I will.
Yeah, I think it was sort of the Airbnb of talent. Someone called us, and they expanded on it by saying, prior to Airbnb, you would never you'd never loan out a room of your house to a stranger. Like, that would be an insane thing to do. And hopefully we get to a stage where people go, oh, prior to Ditto, you'd never let your employee go to another business. That's, how mad is that? But I think the benefits massively outweigh the cons, certainly the perceived cons. That's my experience, and I think it's definitely quite powerful having done secondments as well, because you can tell your story, and customers and investors and anyone you speak to go, oh, okay, well, you've at least been on it, you've at least experienced this from the employee perspective. So that's quite powerful.
I totally agree with you. I think if you can speak from experience, it's always going to be more powerful than, well, in theory, this is a great thing to do.
yeah, exactly.
I've heard somebody once said it's great.
Yeah, I read that it was great, so I'm going to go with it.
So if anybody's listening to this and thinking, gosh, I am a little bit fed up in my job, I would like to try something new, and I'm not really sure what to do, and I've read Yesim's book, and the secondment actually sounds like a really good option. What's your advice to that individual about who should they approach within their organization? How should they position it, if you like, to, what's the business case? How should they do this?
Yeah, so it can be quite difficult, and it's often based on the team themselves. But you should always approach your line manager, and ideally someone in HR, maybe towards the sort of L&D space.
Learning and development, for anybody that's like, oh, what's L&D?
Yes, indeed, learning and development. Yes, no, thank you. Yeah, so I mean, I think it's often a sort of a joint project between whoever's sort of directly managing you, whoever's directly responsible for you, and the HR team, who tend to be quite open to the idea, and they're always looking for ways to kind of increase development, increase retention and engagement, and get those employee satisfaction surveys up. You can always just go to our website. We're at dittotalent.com. You can fill in the form. We'll always book in a call with you and just talk you through the right sort of ways to phrase it, and how you need to talk to your manager. We never talk to anyone's manager directly unless there's permission given to do so. But I think often what happens, and how we've seen, is employees have reached out to us. We've given them the right words. They've gone to their manager and said, there are great development opportunities. I've been on the Ditto platform. I'd really like to put myself forward for this. And most managers are actually really open to it and say, as long as we can fit it around your work, so I can give you a sort of 4 to 5 month stint, and we can get the contract signed off by HR, then I'm all for it. I'm all ears. So people tend to be quite supportive, and I think employees are much more worried about how it looks to their manager than how it actually turns out. I think people are quite open-minded broadly.
Should you be offended if your manager goes, yep, just give me the form to sign?
If they don't skip a beat, maybe a little bit. If there are any managers listening, just wait like 20 seconds and then go, just do a big sigh and go, you know what? Okay, for you, that's fair enough.
I'm obviously joking. I've lost my train of thought now. Oh, I've completely gone off track now. Where was I going? Okay, well, so I mean, Ditto, I'm convinced hopefully more and more people will buy into how beneficial a secondment can be for everybody, right?
Yeah.
What's your role in this, in the business?
So yeah, so I'm the chief product officer, which sounds kind of silly to say out loud when you're a three-person business, if I'm honest. I I think because I've worked at startups before, I'm sort of I'm a bit of the jack of all trades of the company. So I do spend a bit of time talking to investors. I spend a lot of time building product and adding features and creating what we do. The primary thing that I do mostly is talk to customers and potential customers. So I spend a lot of my time talking to HR leaders, COOs, resource managers, people who could well get a big benefit from the platform. And then I spend time onboarding them, walking them through how it works, and really just trying to understand whether or not they have candidates who they'd like to send us a comment today, or they have opportunities which they'd more than happily fill with a seconded candidate. Um, I would definitely say sort of 70% of my week is filled up with talking to customers or potential customers, and that's kind of what I like doing. To be honest, I think I think if you're from the product world, you'd call that discovery. I think that's probably the right term. But I think that's the most interesting thing of starting a company is talking to different industry leaders and saying, we've got this idea, it kind of looks like this. Here are some use cases we see. Like what pops into your head? Like where do you go with this? And the ideas are amazing. You get all these like ranging ideas from, can we do sort of multiple fractional secondments to different scale ups so that my candidate gets a huge breadth of experience, to can we do secondments to charities, and we'll lose money for that, but the impact will be really good and we want to be aligned with more charities. It's really exciting, it's really cool. So yeah, so my role primarily is a sort of customer focused one with a bit of building product and a bit of talking to investors on the side.
It's an interesting phase, isn't it? I think are you about 8 months in at the moment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to see businesses like yours who obviously you start with a business plan, you go out, you start having conversations, you start trialing the service that you're providing. And then, there's that balance between being really agile because there's three of you, right? And you can literally wake up in the morning and go, hey, let's do this today. So you've got the agility to really shape this into whatever you feel is going to be most beneficial. Yet you want to stick with what the original idea was to an
Mm,
extent and not be influenced too much by all that, Bob said that and Sarah said that, and sort of chopping and changing and trying to please everybody, which is really
yeah.
tempting. So how do you go, do you have a process where you go,
Yeah.
okay, that is a good idea, but we're just going to put that on the shelf for now?
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, of the three of us, I probably annoy my co-founders with this sort of stuff the most because I'm quite strict in terms of advice and data. So we try and compile all of the advice we get from people, any ideas that we have either internally or we hear elsewhere, all into some threads on Slack. And we have sort of an open policy of, if you get an idea, there's no bad idea, just chuck it in. But I like to structure particularly our kind of sales efforts in these 2 week sprints. And we do a review at the end of the 2 weeks, and we gather the data. All the people we spoke to, how many candidates did we get? Did we get any opportunities? Did we place anyone else a comment? How did that work? Even just down to sort of the positive signals we got and the number of companies we managed to speak to, doing a certain type of outbounding. And I try and stay pretty strict on, if a random idea or piece of advice pops up in the middle of a sprint, we have to ignore it until the end of the sprint, where we can review and go, well, actually, does any of this data lend itself to any of our new ideas or anything that's come in? I think there's a funny thing in the startup community which I didn't realize until I became a founder, which is everyone wants to give you advice, and obviously advice is free, so you can overweight it or underweight it, to your heart's content, and you'll never know how good it is until you spend 3 months believing in a new piece of advice. But fundamentally, you should be the expert. So external advice is great, but like really, you should be going off the data that you're gathering day to day, which should be 100 times more accurate than the advice you're getting externally. So My co-founders don't always love me for it, because they love new, fresh ideas, get bored easily on, a week of sales outbounding, so we want to do something new. But a bit of strictness in how we run our sprints and how we push forward, I have found has helped us get quite far. And I think reflecting back on the last 8 months, I think we'd all agree with that. Because it is easy to get distracted as a founder. You always want to go after the latest shiny thing. And a lot of building a company is quite dry and not exciting. So yeah, I think that's kind of how we structure it. And we're getting better at it. We've not nailed it yet, but we're definitely getting better at it.
I mean, obviously, we go into new things expecting it to be a certain way.
Mm.
And I wonder if, Hector, today, if you could go back, let's say a year, or whenever you first joined the incubator, what you would say to Hector back then.
That is, oh yeah, that's a very good question. Um, so I think so. It's definitely been a harder journey than I thought it would be. But I think if I could give any advice to a year ago, Hector, I think probably I fell into the trap early on of just like not trusting my experience. So I would, listen to the advice of those who seemed more qualified, whether they had HR experience or came from a different background or just had more years than me. But like reflecting back at a lot of the things I didn't say or didn't do early on, where I thought that feels like a good idea, but other people might not agree with me, so I'm not going to go with it. I think I should have kind of trusted my gut a bit more and pushed, been a little bit more headstrong. But that's something I'm kind of learning on this journey as well. I think there's a balance between loving every idea you have and building a kind of a culture of collaboration in your company. So yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
Any regrets?
Um, Probably loads. I think right at the start we went for like big brands and big shiny companies, and we thought that that would be the answer. But actually, I think if someone had sat us down and said, "Guys, it doesn't matter who the company is, just get some secondments done, get some sales. No company is more valuable than the other in your eyes. Just get the repetitions in and learn the problem." I think I definitely regret like not focusing on easier targets early on, because I think it's very easy to go, oh, let's try and sign Google, but that's almost sort of a silly lofty goal, and probably derails you from, actually that's not the point. You want 100 companies so that they're all sharing and you have this great community, and you don't need to be a unicorn. You can be a great sustainable business, and that's an amazing outcome if you manage to get there. So yeah, that's probably the regret, is thinking in too lofty a way early on and not just thinking like a sensible business would.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I think if you do well with the smaller businesses and you create sort of raving fans who really get what you're doing and see the value in what you're doing, then actually that just keeps spreading and spreading and spreading, doesn't it? And then it'll get to the Googles
Yeah,
of the world at some point potentially. So I think
yeah.
interesting. I'll be watching your journey with great interest. What
Thank
does
you.
success mean to you?
So success means, I think, making as big a possible a positive impact on the world as I can. I think I'm quite mission driven in a sort of make a positive impact kind of way. I've always given 10% of my salary away to charity. I've always had quite a focus on how can I kind of do the most good with the thing that I'm building rather than make the most money.
Where does
Um,
that come
so
from? Because I don't know how many 32-year-olds would give me this answer.
yeah, that's actually true. I don't know. I don't think my co-founders agree with this either. I think they have a very different mission. I'm not sure. Maybe just the way I was raised. I think there's just this. My family has this kind of attitude of like, making lots of money is not the important thing. It's the community you build and the connections you build and the good that you do for other people. We're not a religious family. It's just something that my was always kind of very inbuilt with my parents. So I think I've just sort of always had that, really.
Well, how did they demonstrate that? I'm really fascinated by this because obviously our parents do shape
Mm.
many of our beliefs and ultimately, you know, the people that we become. So I'm really fascinated how they instilled that in you. Was
Yeah,
it
I
very
think
implicit, or, you know, were they like, Hector, you must always give 10% of your salary? Or did they lead by example and you were just influenced in that way?
it was very much by example. Actually, I don't think. Yeah, like no one actually told me like give money to charity and do all that sort of stuff. Like no one kind of had that opinion. You know, like my when I was a kid, I think my mum always had loads of examples of where she would find a wallet in the street and then spend a whole day like trying to find the person, and would go to the police station. They'd be useless. She'd be like, "Fine, I'll do this myself," and would drag me along as a kid. It'd be like Sunday, and I remember it quite vividly and thinking, why are we doing this? Like we were going to go swimming. Like the day is over now. And she was like, no. Like this person is probably like really unhappy. They've lost their wallet. And we'd track the person down and give them their wallet. And they'd be like, sweet, well, like here's some reward money. Mum would be like, no. That's not the point. It's not the point. And the number of people who she would like invite in for tea, or she didn't know. Like the house was always full of people who, were clearly leaning on my family for like emotional support, guidance, or just like someone to be with. But just by example, I think more than anything. And my siblings have it too. I have a older brother and a younger sister who are just like exactly the same. Like they do everything. They automatically do things to go out of their way to help people. Um, to the point where if one of us needs help and you put a note in the WhatsApp group, our family WhatsApp group, you'll just be inundated with advice and responses and links to things and try this number and all this, and it's just built in. I think that's just sort of who we are. I'm not sure it's like a previous generation thing. I think that's very much just my parents sort of decided to be that way, and it just rubbed off, I guess.
It's so fascinating. It would be interesting. I might have to grill them about what makes them that way. And I don't know if you got to the bit in the book about selfish altruism,
Yeah.
about where, you know, I think it's like the worst kept or best kept secret that actually the thing that is so joyful is doing stuff for other people.
Yeah,
And I think
that's
a
the
lot of
secret.
people forget that. It's all about me. How can I make myself happy? And what can I buy? And what can I do? And how can I look? And how many likes can I get?
Mm.
And there might be a little dopamine hit, but it doesn't really lead to long lasting anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of boils into business as well. I think there's a very sort of commercial forward attitude that you get with people where they say, right, what's the highest price we can get away for charging for this thing? When really the thought is, how can we really delight this person
Yeah.
to the point where they go, wow, it really only costs that? Like that's amazing. Like I'd happily pay more.
Yeah.
And I think there's sort of an under promise, over deliver thing, which if you nail, you will have delighted customers forever. It can be for selfish reasons. It can be, you end up with delighted customers who are loyal to you forever. Um, but the other way around doesn't work. It doesn't work if people feel like they're being overcharged for stuff or it's a real commercial relationship. It's really hard to turn that round into a no. Like we have a relationship, and yeah, you pay a fee to cover our costs, but this is very much about making you a delighted person. That way around just always wins in my book.
Yeah. And are your co-founders on board with that as well?
I think I'm getting them round to that idea. Yeah. No, I think people tend to go into starting a company very often, and not wrongly so, but to make money, and to do really well and get acquired and be able to buy a yacht. And I think that might have been at the start, but I think that's kind of changing. I think my co-founders, and I'm seeing this with other people in the cohort as well, who are getting more aligned to actually having a sustainable business with customers who love us. That's and we're making a really positive impact in the industry. We're changing an industry for the better. Picking those three boxes, and you're like you've completed more goals than anyone could dream. Like that's amazing.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And I am encouraged because I see so many businesses now that are focused on more than just how much profit can we make. They're thinking about how they can contribute in a positive way to society and to the environment, and how they can look after their staff's well-being in a genuine way rather than it being a tick box exercise. So I always love speaking to founders who've got a bit more oomph to them.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah, it's really cool. If you had to give one bit of advice to somebody who might be listening to this podcast thinking, yeah, I quite fancy going down the route that Hector's gone down, it would be quite cool to join an incubator and hopefully meet some really cool people and start a really cool business, what would your advice be to them?
So I think my advice would be just go for it. Just go for it as early as late as you want to. I think people do this classic thing where they go, "Oh, I'll do that when I'm an expert at X, Y, Z, or I'll do that when I get to this grade, or I become a chartered engineer, or whatever." And I think those are mostly, unless there's a really good reason to do it, I think those are mostly just excuses, kind of disguised as good reasons. I think my advice would be go for it. Even if it doesn't pan out, you'll learn lots. You just can't put a value on like how much you learn from not just doing an incubator, but if you manage to start a business, it's an MBA. It might totally flop in a year, but the things you learn in that year you'll have forever, and the power of that is immeasurable. So yeah, go for it. It's way lower risk than you think.
Amazing. Well, I think your story to date is incredibly inspiring,
Thank
and
you.
I genuinely can't wait to see what happens over the next, 1 year, because a lot can happen in 12 months. But then
Yeah,
beyond that as well, where will you be in 10 years' time? I'm sure it's going to be a really, really fascinating journey. And I really genuinely wish you all the very, very best. And I think Ditto's onto something really exciting. So yeah, watch this space,
thank you.
everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. This has been great fun, and I can't recommend the book enough. It is brilliant.
Oh, thank you. And I didn't even pay you to say that,
It's
but I
true.
might
It's true.
now.
No.
I'll also put details of Ditto in the show notes. So if anybody's thinking, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind a little secondment, that would be great, and they want some advice on how to make it happen, then they can get in touch with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time.